This material explores Britney Spears' recent controversy, including her DUI arrest and social media behavior, arguing that her struggles stem from a lack of professional structure after retiring from performing.
It really highlights the psychological toll of losing that purpose.
It does. I can see what you're going. Let's see how we can strengthen.
Yeah, let's dive into it.
So the conversational drift into extensive personal touring anecdotes heavily dilutes the core focus on the subject's need for professional structure.
Right. Right out of the gate, there is this genuinely fascinating psychological premise introduced at the very top of the draft.
Yeah, the hook is great.
It is. The idea that elite performers, like individuals who have operated at the absolute highest levels of their industry, inevitably spiral when they lose the grueling, mandated daily structure of their craft. It's a profound observation.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fantastic hook that immediately promises the listener a very deep analytical journey. But the core thesis gets entirely sidelined.
Completely.
The dialogue spends just a massive, disproportionate amount of time detailing the creator's own personal life. I mean, we hear extensively about a personal Pro Tools setup.
Right.
And the nuances of vocal cord stamina and cardio routines designed to prepare for a 45-minute set.
And the drift doesn't even stop there. We also get these lengthy tangential detours about Stone Cold Steve Austin returning from neck surgery.
Yeah, that was a wild turn.
And Mike Tyson eating powdered donuts at a house party in 1992, and Billy Idol substituting one substance for another. And while the underlying idea that performers need structure is fundamentally sound, this massive detour completely forces the audience to abandon the primary narrative thread.
Exactly.
We just lose sight of the titular focus entirely.
We really do. And, the Mike Tyson tangent came completely out of left field, but it's easy to see how this happens, especially in an audio medium.
Oh, for sure.
When you're sitting behind a microphone or even just drafting a conversational script, one thought naturally connects to another in your brain. You think about performance, which makes you think about physical stamina.
Which reminds you of a wrestler.
Right, which reminds you of a boxer. And suddenly you're 5 degrees of separation away from your main point. But you have to think about the listener's experience.
They tuned in for a specific reason.
Yes, they tuned in for a targeted cultural analysis of a highly visible pop culture figure currently in crisis. Instead, they end up stranded in the logistical, administrative weeds of an entirely different person's tour preparation.
Let's look closely at the section discussing the rehearsal schedule. The material spends several minutes breaking down a highly specific timeline.
Yeah, the 5-week thing.
Right, practicing 4 or 5 times a week, taking a 2-week break for an upcoming trip, heading up to New England in April to rehearse with the band.
It's just so much detail.
The crew coming in 3 days early to break down gear, making sure equipment can be shipped overnight from Sweetwater. The momentum completely halts.
It really does.
The audience is essentially asked to hold a thought about a high-profile conservatorship and a DUI while they are taken on a tour of a home office rehearsal space.
Right.
The cognitive load required to hold on to that original premise while listening to shipping logistics is just too high for an average listener on their morning commute.
Is there a risk that focusing solely on trimming these tangents might overlook the underlying value of the creator's background?
That's a fair question.
Because I wonder if we've considered how to leverage these anecdotes rather than just entirely discarding them. The host's firsthand experience as a touring musician is actually an incredible asset here.
It is a unique angle, yeah.
It provides an insider perspective that most pop culture commentators simply do not possess. Most people talking about celebrity spirals are doing it entirely from the outside looking in.
Exactly.
This creator actually knows what it feels like to step off a stage and deal with the silence.
So, a key theme running through this material seems to be establishing credibility through lived experience. We just need to channel it properly.
Exactly. The goal is to edit these tangents down so they serve exclusively as brief, comparative bridges that immediately tie your personal experience back to the subject's current situation.
Make it a bridge, not a destination.
Into the narrative. But they use their anecdotes as a lens to better understand the subject, not as a standalone multi-minute story.
Right. You're holding up a magnifying glass to the subject, not turning the camera entirely on yourself.
The material makes a strong case for the psychological toll of losing purpose by highlighting the grueling nature of the work, but it really needs discipline in the edit.
Yes, discipline is the key word.
The goal is to use the personal experience to authenticate the thesis, not distract from it. If I were rewriting this, Instead of detailing a 5-week personal rehearsal schedule and the logistics of shipping gear, I would distill that entire section into a single, sharp comparative statement.
How would that sound?
You could simply state, as a touring musician, I know firsthand the grueling physical demands, much like Stone Cold Steve Austin returning from neck surgery, which require immense focus and entirely consume your daily life.
That's punchy.
And then you immediately pivot back to the subject by asking, how would a 6-month intensive training camp for a new tour give Britney the exact daily structure her manager says she desperately needs?
Building on that point, what if we looked at it from the perspective of audience retention? When you make that pivot sharp and fast, the listener stays completely hooked.
Absolutely.
You have given them a taste of insider knowledge, the physical toll of touring, and the diaphragm fatigue, and you instantly applied it to the puzzle they are trying to solve.
You validate the thesis that a lack of structure creates a dangerous void.
Right. And you use the Stone Cold Steve Austin reference as quick flavor text rather than an extended history lesson. It adds color without adding unnecessary miles to the journey.
Take the bit about vocal stamina, for instance. If you compress that down, you keep the momentum going. Instead of talking about doing solo recordings for an hour and 20 minutes and losing your voice, you tighten it up.
What's the tighter version?
You say, maintaining the vocal and physical stamina for a stage show dictates your entire routine, from your sleep schedule to your diet. Without a tour on the horizon, that rigid scaffolding collapses.
I love that phrase, rigid scaffolding.
Thanks. This approach preserves the unique voice and expertise, but channels it entirely toward illuminating the main topic.
Okay, so that covers the structural drift. What's the next major area we need to look at?
Relying on live on-air fact-checking for fundamental legal and historical details undercuts the authority of the overall analysis.
This is a crucial mechanical element we have to examine. It really speaks to the structural integrity of a show.
It really does.
As we listen to the material, the narrative momentum abruptly and repeatedly halts. At a critical juncture in the argument, the discussion stops so the host can ask an AI program, which they refer to as Tank.
Tank, right?
Yeah, they ask Tank about the legal distinction between a DUI and a DWI in the state of California.
And it happens more than once. Later in the material, there is a moment where the momentum stops again to guess the year of the subject's last residency.
Yes. The 2018 guess.
The script floats the year 2018, but openly asks the audience or a co-host to correct them if they are wrong. They are basically stating they won't make claims to the accuracy of the date.
Right. And that pulls us into an interesting conversation about the format. Is there a risk that focusing solely on a loose conversational style might overlook the fact that broadcasting the research phase live on air makes the argument feel underdeveloped?
It's a huge risk.
It pulls the listener right out of the otherwise engaging commentary. It's a bit like watching a gripping stage play, only for the lead actor to stop mid-monologue to ask the stagehand what their next line is.
Spontaneity can be fantastic for conversational pacing. A lot of massively successful shows thrive on loose, organic banter, where friends sit around a microphone and look things up together.
Sure, it works for some genres.
But it becomes highly detrimental when it comes to the facts that are entirely foundational to your premise. When you are building a complex psychological analysis of a legal and personal spiral, the basic facts of the arrest and the timeline of the career need to be concrete.
They have to be the bedrock.
Exactly. Pausing the show to ask an AI about California driving laws or crowdsourcing the date of a massive Las Vegas residency breaks the fourth wall in a way that actively diminishes trust.
And trust is the primary currency you're treating on when you deliver this kind of cultural critique.
Yes.
The listener relies on the person behind the mic to be the expert in the room. If you have to stop the tape to Google the basic premise of the subject's most recent arrest, the listener is going to subconsciously wonder how sturdy the deeper psychological analysis can truly be.
If the foundation is shaky, the house you build on top of it feels unsafe.
So the move here is to integrate pre-researched legal and historical context into the foundational argument strictly prior to recording.
Do the homework first.
By doing your homework before the microphones are hot, you allow the on-air commentary to focus entirely on higher-level synthesis, insight, and editorial judgment rather than basic fact-finding.
Yes, And that transition changes your entire relationship with the audience. You shift from being a fellow investigator guessing alongside the listener to being a trusted authority guiding them through the narrative.
When you already know the answer, you can use that fact as a springboard for a much more interesting conversation.
If I were producing this segment, I would come in with that fact locked and loaded.
Give me an example of how that plays out.
Well, instead of wondering aloud about blood alcohol content, impairment, and what the AI has to say about the California Penal Code, you could smoothly deliver a factual anchor. You could say, in California, you can be arrested for a DUI even if you blow a .06, which is under the .08 limit if the officer perceives impairment.
That is such a crucial shift.
Right?
By having this specific fact ready, you can instantly pivot to higher-level analysis. You move right into questioning why the manager, Cade Hudson, might be posturing for a judge by releasing a public statement calling for a long-overdue change.
It advances the plot.
It keeps the listener leaning forward rather than sitting back and waiting for an AI program to load an answer. You are utilizing the law to decode the PR strategy.
That makes sense. But could the evidence also support a different conclusion? Like, perhaps the audience enjoys the live discovery process. Some creators lean heavily into that learning out loud aesthetic.
They do, and it absolutely works for certain comedic or highly casual format. But in a tightly focused cultural critique that attempts to tackle the psychology of a public breakdown, it rarely serves the story.
The tone doesn't match the stakes.
The stakes are too high for the tone to be that casual. Let's look at the career timeline issue. Instead of guessing about the 2018 residency and undercutting your own point, you walk in with that date secured.
Just state it as fact.
You confidently state, since her final Las Vegas residency ended in 2018, we have witnessed a 5-year vacuum of professional direction.
That establishes immediate, undeniable authority.
Exactly.
It sets the baseline truth so that the ensuing discussion about the void of performing feels rooted in reality. You aren't just riffing, you are building an airtight case. It strengthens the entire foundation of the show.
All right, let's move into the final major critique area.
The oscillation between empathetic concern and sensationalized mockery creates a disjointed listener experience that weakens the underlying thesis.
This might be the most delicate yet vital aspect of the writing we're reviewing today.
It's a tricky balance.
It is. The central thesis we're working with here is actually deeply empathetic at its core. It attempts to make a serious, nuanced psychological point about high-functioning individuals losing their life's purpose and subsequently falling into a spiral of substance abuse or erratic behavior.
But the momentum constantly gets derailed.
Because the material repeatedly undermines this empathy by openly mocking the visual quality and nature of the subject's Instagram videos.
You just can't bounce back and forth between deep empathy and cheap mockery. It totally gives the listener tone whiplash.
Tone whiplash is a great way to put it.
The dialogue compares the subject to the infamous Star Wars kid internet meme. It jokes about the footage looking like a grainy Android video. It bluntly categorizes her as a mess simply for dancing in her underwear in her own home.
It's very jarring.
This creates a severe identity crisis for the material. Are we analyzing a tragic psychological phenomenon? Or are we simply pointing and laughing at someone at their lowest moment? The two tones are actively fighting each other for dominance.
I think we really need to unpack why it's so tempting to use this kind of humor in the first place, especially for audio creators.
Why do you think that is?
Well, when you're tackling a heavy, potentially dark topic like a public spiral, mental health struggles, or legal battles, there's a natural human instinct to lighten the mood. You want to keep it entertaining.
Nobody wants to sound like a dusty college lecture.
Right. So you throw in a joke about a grainy Android video or the Star Wars kid because it gets a quick laugh, breaks the tension, and feels conversational.
As I understand it from the notes, the argument here is that the lack of structure creates chaos, but the descriptive language being used actively trivializes that very chaos.
Yes, exactly.
When you spend valuable audio real estate laughing at the camera resolution or mocking the lack of professional lighting, you strip the dignity from the subject.
And when you strip the dignity from the subject, you inadvertently strip the weight and significance from your own thesis.
If this is genuinely meant to be a serious conversation about the massive void left by an all-consuming, multi-decade career, then comparing the subject's coping mechanisms to a clumsy viral video from the early 2000s feels entirely out of place.
Right, and think about what that does to your audience. It alienates the listeners who tuned in for the promised psychological deep dive because they feel the commentary has become too cynical or mean-spirited.
And on the flip side?
It caters to an audience looking for cheap shots and gossip, but the deep psychological analysis will bore them. You end up caught in the middle, satisfying neither demographic effectively.
That's fascinating. What are the potential limitations or counterarguments to that idea? Some might argue that a little levity or observational humor keeps a very heavy topic engaging for a casual listener. Satire and dark comedy have always been tools used to process tragic public figures.
That is absolutely a valid strategy in broadcasting. Humor isn't forbidden by any means, but the humor has to be applied with strategic intent, and it cannot contradict the premise you are trying to build.
It has to serve the story.
You have to align the descriptive language seamlessly with the core thesis. If the thesis is that these erratic actions are symptoms of a retired performer lacking a creative outlet, then the language used to describe her social media behavior should reflect that tragedy or psychological reality.
You must maintain a cohesive, analytical tone that respects the gravity of your own argument.
Precisely.
Exact. You elevate the material when you choose your words with architectural purpose. Let's look at how we can actually rewrite this to fix the tone whiplash.
What's the better approach here?
Instead of joking about the low-resolution quality of the knife dancing video, making Android comparisons and referencing Star Wars Kid, reframe the aesthetic observation to directly support your thesis.
Give me the reframed version.
You could say, watching a world-class entertainer who used to command multi-million-dollar, highly choreographed Netflix-level specials, now performing isolated, unpolished routines in her living room, really underscores the sheer void left by the absence of a professional stage.
That is a brilliant pivot.
It uses the same details but shifts the perspective.
It takes the exact same visual evidence, the lack of lighting, the unpolished setting, the solitary nature of the video, the grainy quality, and uses it as undeniable proof of the thesis, rather than a simple punchline.
You are still painting a vivid, compelling picture for the listener, but you are doing it with empathy and insight.
Take the use of the word mess, for example. Instead of debating whether dancing in your house qualifies as being a mess, the material could analyze the performance aspects of the behavior.
How so?
You might observe when you are accustomed to an arena of adoring fans validating your existence every single night, the silence of a living room and the cold lens of a smartphone become a desperate substitute for that lost connection.
Yes, but notice how that doesn't sacrifice engagement at all.
Not at all. It keeps the commentary highly engaging and visually descriptive.
It aligns perfectly with the author's intent to explore the psychology of the spiral. You've elevated the observation from casual gossip to genuine cultural critique. You're rewarding the listener for paying attention.
Okay, I think we've covered some really solid ground here today.
Let's quickly recap our main points for the list. First, tighten the structure by linking personal anecdotes directly back to the main subject, using them as comparative bridges rather than lengthy detours.
Got it.
Second, pre-research foundational facts to maintain narrative momentum and firmly establish host authority, avoiding live fact-check. And finally, align the descriptive tone to fully support the central psychological thesis, ensuring that the language reflects the empathy of your overarching argument.
This draft has phenomenal potential. The underlying psychological thesis is incredibly strong, and your firsthand expertise provides a unique, highly valuable lens that most pop culture commentators simply do not have. We just need to channel that expertise purposefully.
We invite you to implement these actionable suggestions and submit your revised work back in for another critique.